This is a football reference, okay? Karen, I don't know if you remember this. I'm going to call you Kevin De Bruyne, okay? For those that don't know football, he's a phenomenal midfield player. And one of his amazing abilities is he plays through passes, like wonderful through passes that no one else sees. And then the only thing is with that is then you've got to kind of finish. I'm not saying I'm anything like Haaland, okay? But I don't know if you remember, Karen, that last time I spoke, you talked about the prayer room happening in school. And you set me up beautifully, and you've done the same this morning. So you're from now on. I hope you don't mind if I call you Kevin. I'm not trying to change your sex. I'm just, I'm just acknowledging your wonderful ability to play through passes. So over to me, and hopefully I don't miss the open net, eh? Cool. So, welcome. I'm Johnny, or some of you might know, Ben's brother. I live in this city, and I work in this city mostly with young people. Unfortunately, the rest of the family's not here this morning. Just hasn't been too well over the last day or so. So I'm on my own. Last week, Ben was sharing about prayer and about stillness and quietness. And next week, you got Jay, which is very exciting, looking at thankfulness, gratefulness. Is that right? But kind of looking at those practices of prayer. And today, I'm going to be looking at prayer and contending. We'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know what you think about when you think about the word contending or what comes to mind. So in my mind, again, it's sport. So UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship. It's pretty brutal. I don't necessarily recommend that you watch it. But when I think of contending, I think of that thing of wrestling, of fighting, of kind of competing, getting in a kind of brace with someone and really, really kind of connecting. A good friend of mine who got me into the UFC, I don't really actually watch it so much now, but when I lived in Canada, he was very passionate about it. Conor McGregor was on the rise, and he was telling me, this boy from Ireland, you're just going to do this, do that. But he had actually gone and done a couple of sessions, and he shared with me about this professional kind of UFC fighter, where he taught him how to, so if you don't know anything about it, they basically, most of the time, while they're fighting and standing up against each other, there's also these braces where they're engaging in holds, like wrestling holds. And so this professional did this to him, my friend Rob, and he said, Johnny, you have no idea how much energy and strength and engagement you have just to stay and hold with a professional wrestler or fighter. Like this is before you've even thrown any punches. This is before someone's got you down on the ground and tried to beat you into a pulp. And he said, you're just standing there so that he can't do that, and you're trying to stay engaged in this wrestle and hold. And he said the energy that actually takes is incredible. But when I think about contending, that's what comes to mind. Wrestling, fighting, not giving up, holding embrace. It takes sometimes all that energy and all our fight. If you have any kind of awareness of the scriptures or the bigger story of the scriptures, you'll know that there are many characters throughout the scriptures from start to finish that actually wrestled with God. Probably if you're thinking, and you know the scriptures, probably the first one that comes to mind is Jacob. But it's not just Jacob. There was Abraham, there was Moses, there was Hannah, there was even Esther. And even Jesus himself in the garden wrestled with the Father. And so right through the pattern of the scriptures, there are people that engage and wrestle with God through prayer. I'm going to talk and think a little bit about that this morning. So, if you've got a Bible, or Craig, if you're maybe ahead of me, but if you put it up on behind me, you should be able to see. And I'm going to read from the scriptures, and then we're going to pray. So it's a Gospel of Luke, so if you want to turn up a Gospel of Luke, and it's chapter 18. Oh, my head's on. Is this one on as well? Right. So, most of the stuff this morning will be from this kind of parable. Most of the stuff, I think all of the stuff. But let's read it together, and then I'll pray, and then we'll kick in. It's entitled this, The Parable of the Persistent Widow. Luke, the Gospel of Luke, or Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 18. And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not be down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Cool. Let's pray. If you're new to our community, sometimes what we do, there's no magic power in this, there's no magic dust happens, but it's kind of almost a physical sign that we're open, that we want God to speak to us, that we're open to God to speak to us. For some of us, that's a hand on our heart. It's our physical bodies engage, that then engages the brain, because we're body, mind, and spirit. And so sometimes a helpful way of doing that is to either put your hands out or to put your hand on your heart. If you want to do that, you can. I'm not keeping a record or a note, passing on to Ben saying, oh, Jimmy there, he had his hand on his heart, he's a good man, But this is between you and God. It's actually just a way to show that you're open. So God, we come to you and we thank you for your scriptures and your word. And Lord, in and of itself, it's not magic as such. But we believe that you speak to us. And we believe that when we open it, that it's living and it's active, God. And we believe that your Holy Spirit breathes on us. And Jesus, this is a story that you yourself told many, many years ago. And so would you bring it to life this morning, God? Would you speak to us from it? Would you awaken things in us that are dead? Would you expand us, as Karen was saying, where we need expanded? Would you renew us where we need renewed? Would you fill us with hope where darkness has took over or started to slip in? Would you breathe light where we feel darkness? And would you expand our faith and show us what is possible? And would you niggle at us, God, that we may wrestle and contend with you for what you've called us to, personally, and also, most importantly, as a community, for this city and beyond. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we ask it. Amen. Cool. It's a bit of a bizarre parable, a bizarre story. But right in verse 1, it's very clear why Jesus tells it. He says there, it's evident to the effect of, so that you won't give up. Or as other kind of versions say, the version I read, obviously from the ESV, says, so that you won't give up. But also, so you won't quit, or you'll never quit, or you won't be discouraged. And as we've said many times here in Foyle Vineyard, the world is not neutral. It's not passive. You don't have to go too far along in life for stuff to happen to you. Sometimes it's positive, but also often it's negative. Brennan Manning puts it like this. I thought it was very helpful. He says, failure, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, unemployment, loneliness, depression, the loss of a loved one, when we are deaf to everything but the shriek of our own pain, when the world around us suddenly seems a hostile, menacing place. And sometimes that's what life's like. Sometimes they're the voices and the only voices that we can hear, and our circumstances shout louder than anything else. And God knows this. And Jesus knows this. And he knows that in times in our lives, if you're anything like me, sometimes we want to quit. Sometimes we want to hand in our notice. Sometimes we want to say, I'm done. Or maybe not that strong, but we back off from what God's called us to. And we just take a step back. I'll just shrink a little bit smaller. It's too difficult. It's too hard. And remember, it's not about us. It's about God, as Ben has been reminding us. And this is not about us earning God's love or affection or approval. We already have that in Christ. But this is what God has called us to in our purposes. But he knows that. He knows that we get discouraged. But he asks us to keep going. And so Jesus here in verse 1, and Luke, who's writing the gospel and describing this story again, gives us that very reason for why the parable is told and why Jesus tells the parable. So that you won't quit. So that you won't give up. So that you won't get discouraged. Because we do. If we're honest, we do. There are days when we struggle. There are days when the dark seems darker than it really is. There's days when things happen, we can't explain it, we don't understand, and things creep in. Even the best of us, even the strongest of us, even those who have been gifted with great faith. And so Jesus reminds us not to give up. And he tells this bizarre story. And Craig, if you want to flick on to the kind of images of, they're just very simple images, but it just allows someone to look on. So come back to that, but it's the next slide after that, yeah. Just to explain the story kind of briefly, there's this unrighteous judge, kind of guy doesn't really care much. So there's not really many details about the story. You know, you don't know how long, you don't know what happens, you don't know any background really. If it was a film, it would be a terrible film. You don't get to kind of connect with the characters, you don't get a journey alongside. You know, when they critique films, I'm going off a little white horse here, but you know when they critique films, they're like, oh yeah, the character wasn't built very well, you know, we weren't able to really identify him. Well, in this sense, you know, not that Jesus was a good story, but you know, not in this sense. Hopefully that's not too sacrilegious, but, you know, you could have maybe give us a bit, anyway, that wasn't the point, but you don't get much of the character, right? You just get an unrighteous judge, you just get a widow, and she's coming seeking justice, and she's doing it, I don't even think it says day after day, it doesn't even give me any time, she just consistently does it, right? She's persistent, so she doesn't stop in this context. In Luke. And most of you maybe know this, but just in case you don't, gives a little bit of context. In those days, way back, widows didn't really have much chance or opportunity. And so if they lost a husband, because it was a man's world as such, and not being sexual, that was just the state of it where it was. And so all of your status, all of your ability to survive and exist was in that context through men. And so if you lost your husband, you were in a pretty desperate state. You either had to rely on your wider family, or if you had an elder son, or someone, as we know, like say, for example, in the story of Ruth, where Boaz comes and kinsman and redeems. So you had to rely, and you didn't really have much. And you're kind of right down at the bottom of the rung in society. You would have been marginalized. You were very much open to oppression and fraud. And that's why in Levitical law, which is a bit way back, and in the scriptures it talks about and often repeats through scriptures, you know about remember the orphan, remember the widow, remember the oppressed, that kind of thing. Because these were the people in society that didn't really, they were struggling, they were right down, they didn't have the resources or the ability to engage, and were open then to oppression. So you think of maybe refugees or people that get trafficked. It's that kind of thing where people don't really have any ability to kind of fight or look after themselves. And yet the random thing about this woman is that she just keeps going after this unrighteous judge. Day after day, and doesn't quite say that, but persistently, right? We can put that in a bit of license, day after day. And the judge answers her not because he likes her, not because he respects God, not because he even likes any people. The only reason why he gives her justice is because this annoying woman who's a widow keeps pestering him. That's what the story seems to say anyway. He says, you know what? I'm kind of sick of her. This is me putting license on it, but I'm kind of sick of her. You know what? She's pestering me. She's annoying. Before I kind of just get absolutely my head done away, like my head done in, I'm just going to give her what she wants. And that is the only reason the story seems to state why he gives her justice. He relents. He says, it's because she is such a bother, I will give her justice. The only reason, so I won't get beat down by her continual coming, her unrelenting persistence, causes the unrighteous judge to give her what she wants. And then Luke in verse 6, oh yeah, like last week, they're going to be shouting, so just that's a warning. Mike did tell me, I forgot. I think he's trying to play it back on me, you know, like, I'm going to get you back, Johnny. So, anyway, so sorry, Luke describes in verse 6, he says this, and the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says, and will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night. It's almost like a compare and contrast GCSE English exam. Do you know what I mean? You know, when you had to do this, I don't know if you remember that back, I just about remember, where you have to like compare and contrast, or as theologians point out, it's this kind of idea of lesser to greater argument. Or here's a little bit, this is making me sound smarter than I actually am, but you know, it's worth it. English scholars call this a so you can't even say it, a fortiori, all right? So it's this idea that if A, the lesser, is true, then how much more is B, which is the greater, must be true. Let me give you an example of this. So again, football analogy. If you hadn't guessed, I like sport. So if I can score a penalty, how much more could Messi score, right? If I'm going to score the penalty, then surely Messi's going to score it. Does that make sense? So for those that don't know, Messi's one of the best players that ever existed in the world. I know there's a debate between Ronaldo. We'll not get into that. But he's a very, very good footballer. I'm quite an average footballer compared to him. All right? So the idea is if something lesser is true, then the greater is most definitely true. And Luke uses this, and we don't have time to go into this, but Luke uses this quite a lot in his gospel. Just one quickly, you remember about right at the start where he says, if you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, who will, if you ask for I think it's a fish, he gets a serpent. Something like an egg, he gets a snake or something like that. Stone, yeah, something like that. But he uses it through, and we'll not go into it because this morning we don't have time. But he uses this compare and contrast. If A, the lesser is true, then B, the greater, is most definitely true. And he uses this here in this context with the unrighteous judge. If an unrighteous judge who doesn't give, careful what language I'm going to use there, doesn't give a care about anyone or other people and doesn't respect God, is willing to give a persistent widow justice, how much more is the God who loves us and is for us willing to do that if we ask him and if we go after him and if we consistently ask him? Craig, could you go back to the other slide? And just, sorry. Don't do the arrows one yet, but that's good. So, I'm aware that I'm running out of time, so that's okay. And we want to give space for you guys to just reflect and think. But I'll try and bring this conclusion with just this little thought, and then it maybe leads us into what is it for us? What is God asking for us to contend for, personally in our own lives and as a church? And I was thinking about this story, and I've read through it quite a few times this week. And I was asking this question: what caused this woman to keep pursuing the unrighteous judge? Time and time again. And here's a few words that came up for me. Pain. These words aren't very nice, by the way. We don't like them. We shy away from them. Pain, suffering, injustice, desperation. What else have I got? That's not right. God, are you not going to do something about that? And often it takes those moments in our lives to force us into the wrestle. And so I came up with this little equation just in my own thinking. It's not the only way, it's not the only thing, but it was just me thinking out. And so and this has been my experience, and I'll share just very briefly how that maybe works on a very simple scale. Sometimes we have a bit of uncomfort, we have a bit of pain, we have a bit of suffering. It could be really extensive, it could be small irritation, frustration in our job, or it could be a really difficult thing that happens to us. But there's a sense of pain, suffering, injustice. And usually then where it leads us is into some form of desperation, some form of frustration, some form of like, come on, what do you, And then I think that's the place where it can, and with God's grace, it then forces us into the wrestle. And it forces us into the contention, and usually it starts with prayer, and then prayer often leads us into action of justice. So let me give you a very, very quick, simple picture of how this might look in my own life. So I work with young people, okay? And a few weeks ago, probably maybe a month ago now, I'm hanging out with these young guys that I know that I've worked with. Difficult young guys, but great young guys. And it's the guy's birthday. I'm there for a couple of hours. The hours just go away. But literally, for the whole time that I'm there, the lads are just chain smoking, and it's not tobacco. All right? And I'm in this environment, and we're chatting and just being present, that kind of thing. But in me, there's a frustration that's starting to kind of burn. Why are their lives like this? Why do they seem like they have so little meaning? Why is this their go-to to survive? Like, it's not just one, but literally, like, he's literally stopping, starting, going again. Just to kind of, I don't know, get himself through the day or process. And so I'm leaving. So that's where the pain, the suffering, does that make sense? Kind of starts to go. The questions of like, what's going on? And I'm trying to then invite God into it so I don't get frustrated and lose hope and think, what's going on? And so I leave that place and I try and move it into prayer, because I know if I don't move it into prayer, then I just get frustrated, like, stuff that isn't there, not there, just gonna, that's where their life's gonna be, tough luck, blah, blah, blah. And so I try and move it into this place of like, God, what's going on there? God, you've got to break in. God, I don't know what to do in that situation. I feel frustrated by being there for that last 2 hours and feeling like it's quite a hopeless place. And so I start having this honest conversation with the Lord. And there's doubts in it too, like, God, can you even do anything in this moment? And then I try and remind myself and say, yes, God, do something. Do something. And so the pain, the suffering, the frustration leads to desperation. And then leads to me to start contending and wrestling for those guys. Does that make sense? And so you can put that in your own kind of context. Your neighbour. You have all these conversations with your neighbour, but nothing's really going anywhere. And it starts, you're working with young people in school, nothing seems to, or there's a situation in work, or actually you've experienced a deep trauma or a pain. And in God's grace, we allow that pain and that suffering to move us to desperation, and then moves us to start contending and wrestling for what God has called us to. And again, just to reiterate, because sometimes I think we can get tied up in this is not to earn a reward from the Lord. We have all the rewards we need. This is just the grace and goodness of God that actually wants us to be involved in what He's at on the earth, and loves for us to be involved. And we, if we're honest, love to be involved. Because when we see God break through, isn't it incredible? Isn't it amazing? We're like, whoa, God, thank you. And I get to be a part of this. Wow, double thank you. And so again, it's not about earning His love, but actually, it's about God saying, Johnny, do you fancy it? Are you up for it? I don't know, God. But yes, I think deep down I do. He says, okay. But I've got, like, faith is this small. And my doubts seem louder than my beliefs. And He says, that's okay. Do you believe that I'm real? I think so, God. Have you seen me work before? Yes, God. And I remind myself of those times that He's worked. Oh, yeah. Do you remember that life where you didn't think it was possible and I broke through? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, God. Let's go again. And it takes that honest conversation. Yeah. It's not this tweet like, yeah, you got to have faith. It's these honest conversations that we have with the Lord that sometimes come out of pain and suffering and hurt, that move us towards a desperation, that move us then towards a contending, and then God uses it for His kingdom, for His purposes, and for His glory. We take ourselves not too seriously, but we take God seriously. And we take what He says seriously, and we take Him at His word, right? And I'm trying to learn that better. And you know what the funny thing is? That often that we discover that in the wrestling itself is a means of grace. And it's actually even a channel for God's blessing on us. And that's the kind of paradox, and that's what's going on in the parable here. So, a little question to leave you with, and then we'll have a few moments as we do just to pray and just reflect. And then I want to read over us Hebrews 11 And I want to read a prayer over us that I found just preparing for this randomly. So we'll do that. So the question is this. What has God asked you to contend for? In your own life, in your own circumstances, where you work, where you live, where you go about your business? And what has he asked you to contend for? And what has he asked us to contend for as a community? And often you find as we bring those individual things together, God then moves us as a community. It's 2:45. Were you guys going to play a song or music? Yeah. So what we'll do is, do you want to come up and play in the background? Then I'll read Hebrews 11 and this prayer, and then we can have a few moments where we just let God be present. And as we've been doing over the weeks, if you want to get communion, you can. If you just want to be quiet, and then I'll eventually bring it to a close. And so I'm doing this for myself as much as I'm doing it for us as a family. But this is asking God, restore unto me the joy of your salvation. Remind me of who you are. We were talking about it this morning, singing about it this morning. He reigns above it all. And this act of faith. And all it needs is a tiny mustard seed. And if you've got bigger than that, praise be to God. All right?
Thank you for joining us at Foyle Vineyard Church. We love walking out this adventure of being a family together on mission. If you've joined us for the first time today, we'd love to connect with you further. Head over to our website, www.foylevineyard.co.uk, and click I'm New to keep up to date with all the ways in which you can get involved with this busy family. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.